Okay, are we ready to call the meeting to order?
Yes,
Okay.
and you'll be running the meeting this evening, just in case we should lose the connection. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes.
We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I don't see any members of the public here for public comments. So we have no public comments. We need approval of September 12th, 2019 committee meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion?
You do approve this agenda.
Pardon me?
Approve this agenda.
Approve the agenda. Yes, that's not on the list here.
Oh. It's the second bullet point.
Approval of agenda. Sorry. We have a motion to approve the agenda and a second. All in favor? You in favor, Joanne?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Public comments, we talked about approval of the September 12th, 2019 committee minutes. We have a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a second. Joanne, all those in favor? Aye. Joanne, do you approve?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the agenda says the sole source and emergency procurement reports is tabled. Is that correct?
They're taking it off the table.
Taking it off the table.
Yes.
It was tabled.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to talk about. Okay.
All right, I guess that's me. So included in board docs and your packets are two reports. Twice a year, the procurement office updates me on sole source and procurements, and annually we report to the board. These are sole source and emergency procurements. These are required to report to the board, required by the procurement code. So sole source is when there is only one source for the particular service or product that's being chosen. And so we require a sole source letter or some sort of information that provides some background knowledge of why it's a sole source, why it's considered that. And ultimately the procurement office reviews it to determine whether it should be or not, and then I review and approve that item, whether it's sole. So I have the responsibility of approving whether an item is sole source or emergency. And so you'll see items from the P-card report. Many of them are elevator repairs, or specific items from maintenance, technology, instructional services that cannot be purchased from any other manufacturer or provider. Emergency would be a situation where there was maybe some flooding or a major component of a building was down, like a water heater, or say an awning was hit by a car. I mean, I have all kinds of examples because all of these things have happened. And it was a danger for children to stand under an awning. So we had to right away replace items like that. So that's the sort of reporting that we do, and there are two reports here for your review, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have on those.
The reports are dated, one is dated February 14th, 2019.
Yes, that's for the first half of the last fiscal year, and then the other report is the last half of this
July 1st,
this past
2019.
completed fiscal year. Yes, sir.
Are there any questions?
Can you explain what it
I
means?
have a question. Tanya, the pages that I have, I'm working off of a hard copy from our previous meeting. It has sole source purchases from October 31st, 2018, several from 2018. Was that just an error that those were included in there?
That was the second page of the report dated February 14th, 2019.
Okay.
So that was the last half. Let's see, that was the last let's see, first half of last fiscal year. So it was the period from July 1, 2018 through December 31, 2018. That's that period.
Okay, I was just looking at them in reverse. Do you need a recommendation on this to the full board to accept this report?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I just have 2 questions.
Is there a motion?
Did you have a,
I have 2 questions.
Rachel has a question.
So I'm looking at the one dated July 1, 2019, and I don't see anything for January 2019. It starts in February, so I just wanted to make sure that that was not an error or omission, or if there just wasn't anything.
There wouldn't have been anything if everything is reported. It just so happens that we summarize it by month, so there weren't any sole source or emergency in January.
Okay. In the future, it might be good to maybe just put nothing for that
No,
month.
none reported this month. Okay.
Yeah. And then my other question was regarding, what does it mean when it says, I see like train supply, it says territorial? Is that because they're the only one in the area that provides that service?
Yes, they're the, what would you call that, Reggie? They're the service provider in the regional area or
They're
something?
the only provider in that territory that can
Do-
sell that particular product.
That, okay. That was all I had?
As far as the emergency procurement, generally those requests come from Robert Otting to me via, usually maintenance is making the initial request, and then it comes to me, and then I review, discuss with procurement as quickly as possible, and then we'll do an electronic approval so that they can hurry up and buy the parts and materials needed to correct any major maintenance issues, so.
The Tyson Krupp, I assume that's the elevator vendor,
Yes.
seem to have a lot of trouble with elevators.
Elevators require a lot of maintenance.
Is that, yeah, I guess.
And probably, not permitting, but inspections.
Inspection.
Oh, right.
Inspections too.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, okay. Okay. Joanne, do you have any other questions?
I do not on this one.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve, or to recommend to the board that we present this for approval?
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Joanne?
Aye.
Aye, okay, got it. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is budget priorities.
May I say something? Is anybody in the queue?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the one document that we don't have in board docs is the 5 board goals. And one of those goals very specifically pertains to the work that we do in the Finance Committee, fiscal responsibility. The Beaufort County Board of Education will be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, ensuring fiscal stability, sound financial planning, sound internal controls, and fiscally responsible decision-making. I would submit that any recommendations coming out of our committee would support any budgetary recommendations we might make would support that goal, the specifics of that goal. And I would also imagine that ours would probably be the least in size, and that, you know, our academics committee and our operations committee would certainly put forth the lion's share of priorities. When I looked at this, and when Tina suggested this to each of the committees, I envisioned that we would, and if, you know, I would like to hear your feedback, Rachel and Dick. I envisioned that we would put aside a certain dollar amount out on the board's budget to have audits of various kinds. Or another suggestion that actually a community member put forth was we could have a position, an internal auditor that reports solely to the board. These are just some of the things I envisioned of what we might suggest to bring forward to the full board. But I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Rachel?
I agree with what she said in the very beginning about us aligning it with the board's goals and whatnot, and then also with our scope, you know, keeping it within those specific areas, but also then we need to look at the budget in particular, and there's some of them that may not necessarily fall on there, so.
Excuse me, Robin, I'm having some trouble hearing if there are ways to.
Let me,
Maybe Rachel
I'll
can
move
move a little closer to
I'm at
it.
like the end of the table here,
Yeah.
so, here.
Can you
I'll
hear?
get closer. I was just saying, I agree with you with aligning it with the board goals and then also making sure it falls within our necessary scope and just not getting into the weeds with it, basically.
Good, thank you.
My belief is that in the budget process, you know, obviously the academic committees is going to be looking at programs, and then going to be looking at staffing to make those programs happen. That's also what the operations committee will be doing for the facilities and the maintenance and all those kinds of things. We have a much smaller piece, but a significant piece, and I assume, this is something I need some clarification on, I assume that we should be looking at the programs that the finance department has, the software that they use, the staffing that they have. I don't know, where does technology fall? Does technology fall under, so we would look at technology, and that's a significant piece for what the technology programs and staffing have, because as we all know, staffing is 80% of our budget, and that's where a lot of things need to be looked at, that programs first, and then staffing to support the program. So are all the programs necessary? Or do we have some that are outdated, or some that could be substituted with a cheaper version? And doing this, for example, we have the new system coming on for time cards. And that system is going to cost a significant amount of money. We're rolling it out now. But there should be some cost savings. If we're doing things electronically, we shouldn't be using a courier and the vehicle and the two couriers that we have. That's the kind of thing we should be looking at in the finance piece, as well as the other things that you mentioned for auditing and so on. What do you all think about that?
I just wanted to get clarification on that
Go
technology
ahead,
part.
Rachel, I'll go after you.
I just wanted to get clarification on the technology part. So you're,
I'm
so
over,
instructional technology doesn't fall under you?
no.
Only administrative?
So
Okay.
Exactly.
firewalls
Because
and
that's what I want to make sure we don't.
internet filtering and email and network controls,
Munis.
servers. And then the financial software would be Munis. That would be the only software we have in the finance department. Food service also reports to me, and they're enterprise fund, sort of very separate, in a separate fund, not in the operations, general operations of the district. Not in the general fund. So they're self-sustaining within their area. And we have one courier, sorry.
One courier. Okay. Joanne, did you have something?
Yes, I would imagine that the efficiency study that Dr. Rodriguez is going to go forward with would yield some good information in regard to the staffing related issues in the finance department. Our task in bringing forward recommendations, I agree with you, it's relatively simple. We're, if we look at our goals that pertain to this, if we look at our scope, we really should be focused on oversight. Are there any additional measures that might supplement our oversight of finances? And the only thing really that I could conceive of would be an audit or hiring a new position. A lot of organizations have that internal auditor that reports solely to the board. That would be, I suppose, a new idea for us. But again, I don't know whether we would want to implement that prior to the results of an efficiency study. Not sure about that. Previous board member, Joseph Dunkel, I want to say a year or so back, made a motion to reserve $200,000, I think was the ballpark number. I don't have that motion in front of me, for audits of varying kinds. At that time, we were entertaining P-card audits and so on and so forth. And this would ensure that there was a certain amount delegated for such audits should the board deem them appropriate, or should the committee make those recommendations to the board. And I would hope that we would put forth something like that, a recommendation like that to the board at our work session. Now, I don't know the status of the work session now. We're all supposed to have these recommendations ready at that time. So maybe Tina could just give us a brief update on what that agenda might look like for Friday. I know that the Saturday piece has been, we don't have that, but if you could just give us a little bit of info there. Will we need to bring it forward?
Yes, and it's gonna be in the morning
All right, good.
on Friday.
So, ideally, the finance committee here now will come up with a recommendation and bring it to the board. And I would assume if we do recommend to the board, and should that be the committee's will, that we set aside a certain dollar amount for finance-related audits, we do that today.
That's a lot to chew on.
I know it is. But, the other option would be we could call another meeting, give it some thought in the interim, and the Finance Committee hasn't called additional meetings. We've been by the book once a month, more or less, but we could actually do that between now and the Friday work session coming. What is that, the 25th of October? Is that the date?
That is correct, 25th.
Okay, okay. So, I don't know if that's doable.
I'm gonna ask Tanya a question real quick, Joanne. On that efficiency study, have we already gone out for that? Do we have an idea of the timeline for that?
We have written it, and I just 2 days ago sent back edits and wanted to expand the scope a little more to include a few more things. It is ready for a final review, so we have not gone out, but are ready to go within days.
Okay.
So we could probably have it out on early next week, by early
So I'm trying to figure out timeline here with that going out, timeline of getting the responses back, hiring, and then them actually completing the work,
Right.
and then including any recommendations from that are finance related into a potential audit of anything, and additional deeper dive.
Or a change in the budget as
Right.
well. And that information will be very good in leading up to the budget. So generally, as of late, we have been going out for bid for about 4 weeks. And then generally we convene a committee together the following week, and then it may take about 2 weeks for a decision. And then, depending on the size, if it were 400,000 or more, but I don't foresee that happening, it would have to come to the board. But less than that, Dr. Rodriguez has the authority to sign off on as long as it's within budget. And we have already earmarked funds in the budget for the study. And so we can move forward, with his approval right away. The timeline, I don't recall, we won't know until we get the bids back how long the study would be. I would say at least a couple of weeks of field work, and then they would have to have probably a couple more weeks to bring all their data together and make their analysis and then report to the board. So it's gonna take, I'd say, 2 to 3 months from start to finish.
I'm trying to figure out where it's gonna fall in our, in the budget timeline that we have, because that information could be very
So at the
great to have, but if
earliest-
we can't have it, we can't have it. So I'm just
Yeah.
trying to figure out how we can
thinking-
expedite it if possible.
At the earliest, I'm thinking would be January 1, that we'd be ready for them to begin their work. Perhaps mid-December, but then there's the holiday in there. So, because if we went out for bid on Monday, for example, that's the 21st or so, Monday's the 21st. So say a month, that would be November 21st, and then give us a couple of weeks so you're gonna be mid-December before it's selected and approved and the contract awarded. Then in that period, there's a 10-day intent to award period, so it's probably gonna be January before they're able to begin the analysis and their on-site work.
Because we have, looking at the timeline, budget forums in the last week of April. And then where's your first presentation?
I have one monthly to the board.
But that's the one that's for county council.
Anya, I have a question.
Yes.
In your recollection, I know I don't recall how many years you've been with the district. Have we ever had a position of the internal auditor that reports to the board?
We did have an internal auditor. I believe it reported to the chief financial officer at the time. It was about 10 to 11 years ago.
It's been a while.
And he was a certified internal auditor, so he had the credentials behind it. He stayed with us for a few years, and then the position was filled with other individuals, 2 others that did not necessarily have those credentials, and was doing more program kind of analysis. But the first one we had initially was a credentialed certified internal auditor.
Does anybody know if that is common practice for school boards to have an independent auditor reporting only to the board? I've never heard of it, but that doesn't mean somebody's not doing it.
Well, common practice in South Carolina or common practice, elsewhere and beyond?
Well,
I've heard of it in other municipalities and things like that, like.
in municipalities,
Yeah,
I've
but
heard about
not
it.
on a school board level. I've
And
heard
I
it.
haven't heard it on a school board, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea or it's not, but it would be interesting to know that, to see how
It would be.
how that relationship would work with the finance department and so on. And the scope of work for that would be interesting to have an idea of what that would be and how it would be handled.
Yes. So those were just 2 suggestions. And I don't know, Dick and Rachel, how you perceive what your methods are that might help us heighten our good stewardship of taxpayer dollars. In addition to those 2 suggestions, they're just suggestions.
Right.
So I wonder if we need a little time to reflect and perhaps meet again before the work session.
Fine.
What are your thoughts?
Go ahead.
Would you prefer to do that?
I think the one thing that, and I may be incorrect in my perception of this, but I think that the efficiency study really is gonna go to a lot of our recommendations and also the board's, decisions as a whole. And I'm looking at the timeline and I'm wondering if we shouldn't, try to include in that additional conversation, adding that as a part of this
Efficiency
budget,
study?
adding it as part of the budget timeline, and so that we align it and
Right.
speak with administration regarding making sure that it aligns appropriately so that we can, if we're going to be expending this amount of money on an efficiency study, we should be making sure that it's gonna fall within our budget timeline for next year.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the superintendent's preliminary report, or preliminary budget being April 7th, board budget discussion occurring at the end of April, the 21st and the 24th, as of right now. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can incorporate that into the RFP or the request or whatnot. So I think that's important in making sure.
I agree, and now that I'm thinking about it, any work that we do on programs and staffing and everything else prior to getting that comprehensive efficiency report could be for naught, perhaps, because the efficiency report would come up with different outcomes. But that also puts us farther behind what we wanted to do. We wanted to really start doing this for a couple reasons. One, to get ahead of where we were last year in the preparation. And two, if we are going to make staffing changes, or reductions especially, to allow employees to have notice that their positions may not be there, and give them time to find perhaps another position within the district, or make plans for other employment elsewhere. It's really not fair for employees to get, a couple months' notice and then see you later. We really don't want to do that. So but on the other hand, this efficiency study is pretty darn important. So perhaps this is a discussion piece for the entire board. And just talk about the timeline, talk about the impact of the strategic, or the regular efficiency study. What do you think?
Well, and I also think that because we've bumped the timeline up, and we certainly haven't gone out yet for it, so there's no loss in time there. So if we can circumscribe within the requirements, like, listen, we need this done, and put them on a time limit so that we only get responses from companies that are and that may put the cost up on the efficiency study, but if you expend a little bit to make sure that you're cutting in the appropriate areas, I think that it's well worth the investment. So I think that's a conversation though for the whole board to be having.
What do you think, Joanne?
Well, the efficiency study, well, we're throwing around the word cutting, but it may look at our finance department and see them, woefully understaffed. I don't know.
Right. Yes, you're right.
But let me get back to the what we can do proactively as a finance committee, and what we can recommend to the full board to further the board's goal, which is fiscal responsibility. Take, for example, we've already begun this process. I don't mean to tie us all in the back, but we already did with Rachel's motion to go forward to recommend to the board an RFP or a procurement a compliance audit. Okay, that's already been put in motion. It's been accepted by the board, and it's those types of actions specifically that I feel we should be looking at here. We haven't looked, we don't know what this would cost at this point. That's a conversation that we need to look at further, that procurement compliance audit. But those are the types of things that we need to build into the budget, and maybe even specifically the board's budget. We're going to be looking at the board's budget as a whole board now going forward. And I see that as something that might need to be included in there. We have, $25,000 built into the referendum to defray costs. That's not the number, is it, Tanya? It's bigger, isn't it?
It was originally, an additional 25,000 was added for referendum, but there is savings now due to the, not having a lobbyist on board. So there is actually
And I'm
75,000
getting off topic
available.
there, but the idea is we want to make certain that that dollar amount is in there. If we want to do an extra check on something, some aspect of our, finances, it's built in and it's ready to go. And it supports what we do in our scope and what our board goal is on fiscal responsibility. But yes, I know a lot hinges on the efficiency study. I know a lot of that will probably be discussions in the operations committee due to the fact that HR falls under their purview. So I see our job, honestly, I see it as very simple, pretty straightforward. But these are only two examples that were generated today. Can we look at our calendars perhaps and schedule, are either of you two interested in scheduling a meeting to bring at least one recommendation forward at the work session? Because I know our other committees are working toward that.
I am out of town, actually, the next week, the 22nd through the 25th. I get back the 25th, so I was gonna talk to Ms. Robin about calling in for part of our work session.
21st? Monday?
21st, I know I've got some things, hang on, let me check, both on
So Rachel, you're out of town. I'm sorry, I'm catching like every fourth word. The
sorry.
rushing of the road is so noisy. So you would not be able to
at 9:45.
participate remotely if we were to have another meeting?
I possibly can participate remotely. I've just got meetings, I've got like 3 different meetings, one in the morning, one at noon, and one at 6:20. So I could fit it in between there if I can call in. I probably wouldn't be able to travel for it.
Yeah. Telling you that the estimated cost for our annual yearly audit is what, about 56,000 that
Yeah.
we put aside in our board budget?
Yes.
Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so, and that's required. This is a discussion for the full board, but it starts with a recommendation out of our committee. I move that the finance committee recommends to the full board designating an additional $50,000 annually for finance-related audits in the budget.
Is that in the current year
No,
or the
you're
next
talking
fiscal
next year, is that right?
This is all for next year because
Yes.
the recommendations we're bringing forward at our work session are for next year.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Discussion? Rachel?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
We, out of our finance committee, we recommended this compliance audit, procurement compliance audit, without knowing what it might cost us. And so if we put aside or we designate a certain dollar amount in the budget, we won't be caught without the funds to cover said audit. If we don't use them, we don't use them. And 50 may not be high enough.
Rachel, do you have something?
Yeah, I'm just not sure I'm not sure where I fall with the recommendation, and I probably would want to have some feedback from Tanya just because I understand the importance of having that money, but then at the same time, when we're talking about, being more careful with spending and looking at where, different items, and we're talking about an efficiency study and whatnot, I am leery to add something into the budget when we haven't quite looked at where things are right now. So I'd like to get some
Remember,
feedback.
sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to get some feedback maybe from Tanya on, how often in the past we've done audits. I know we do the one a year and it costs $50, and we're going out now for that P-card one, but, I'm leery to make the, I support the concept, but I don't know if I support it right now at this time.
Well, we didn't budget for the procurement compliance audit. We didn't budget for that. And it would be, assuming the board chooses to go forward with it, we didn't budget for that. And nobody has reservations about that fact. We hadn't budgeted for it, but we found intention things. Not just to be proactive.
Right, and I understand that. I think that, well, we might not necessarily budgeted for it, but we also haven't already signed on the dotted line for it. We were going out to find out how much it would cost us to, so if it does come back and it's going to be a vast, expense, and it's not something that we think is prudent at this time, then we certainly can pause that. So it's not an expense that we've necessarily incurred yet.
Correct.
Tanya?
Yes, so I would, first of all, have been thinking the whole time as you were discussing priorities and goals, that really, particularly in this committee, revenues needs to be a central part of the conversation in this committee. I think that is really the beginning of the budget process, and everything you will decide when it comes to expenditures will rely on how much in revenues we're able to achieve. We have some huge challenges ahead of us with respect to revenues. One, it's going to be very interesting to see what we collect in the current year. And we'll be gaining that information in January and February, the bulk of it. So we'll have a pretty good idea at that point how much we're going to have. But projecting the next year's revenues is going to be very important. And what allocations we're going to receive from the local side. But even more importantly is the state side. So everyone received a copy of this new revenue model, funding model from the State Department of Revenue or Fiscal Affairs, and that may have some serious implications for Beaufort. It is an allocation model that rolls funds up at the state level, state funding, and redistributes it back on a per pupil allocation, weighted per pupil allocation back to school districts. And Beaufort, being a very wealthy district compared to the others in the state, that has a potential of losing some of that revenue. So it's going to be critically important to monitor what's going on there and monitor what's going on at the state legislative level to know, is there a bill, is it going through, is it being supported by certain legislators, and so on. And is it going to be something that we may want to hire a lobbyist to help us to keep informed of what's going on at that level? So that's going to be really important, and maybe some of the discussions you may want to have with Ms. Stokes Murray coming up at the work session. So it's sometimes harder for us, being so demographically separated from Columbia, to keep in tune with what's going on a daily basis. So that's going to be really important, those revenues. So my concern with the motion is that without knowing what those revenues are going to be, we're already locking ourselves into an increase in the budget. I'm not opposed to audits. We have them all the time, and that we're used to. That's the world we live in. But we can certainly build a budget if there is a consensus of the board that includes the additional funding, And as we move forward, or the additional expenditure, as we move forward, it can be part of the budget deliberations like as we had last year. So, revenue is really a concern for me, and to make sure that we have enough to do the things that we really do the priorities that we're establishing for us. So that's.
So I have a question. Thank you, Tanya. That provides some perspective. Robin, how much have we set aside for the lobbying contract in recent years annually?
It's $35,000.
$35,000, okay. So we built that in there. We built that in as part of the budget because it was the board's will that we continue with lobbyists, using lobbyists.
With that particular with McNair, and that's splitting it with county.
Correct. So is it Dick and Rachel, are you saying you don't want to make any demands on the budget out of finance committee? And because I assume the larger demands are going to come out of the academics and operations committee. Would that be an accurate statement?
I don't know that I would say universally that. I think that we may find that we do need to add something to the budget for the finance department, but it would depend on what the efficiency study said. But as far as audits concerned, as having monies set aside for audits controlled by the board, I believe that if we need to have an audit, if the board needs to call for an audit, it's going to be something that comes up that we have to address. And it's going to have to, and it would be a high priority thing. And the whole board would vote to say, we found a problem, we need an audit. And the full board would either agree or disagree, hopefully agree to have the audit. And we would have to then find the funds to do it. But to put money in there saying that we might need an audit, I just don't feel that's good precedent for something like an audit to take care of a problem that is unforeseen. We have audits for annual audits that we foresee that we have to do, but having a contingency fund for an audit, I find that just a little bit hard to swallow.
Okay, so let me ask you this, all fair statement. How do you see the finance committee moving forward that board goal, which is fiscal responsibility, and what is spelled out? Ensuring fiscal stability, sound financial planning, sound internal control, and fiscally responsible decision making. Those are typically the tasks of our district staff. But this is a board goal, and this comes from us. So, do you see any budgetary implication that would further that out of our committee?
I'm really glad you asked that question because it's something that I kind of was thinking on recently about how we address that goal in our policies. So I think the finance committee should now be looking at what policies we would recommend to the full board that are either annually, biannually, every 5 years, those type of policy recommendations that we can make that we see as leaning towards that fiscal responsibility and those goals of the board. Because I can tell you as someone that served on the policy committee, there's really not a lot of that in that policy manual. So I think that that's definitely a place that needs development. And I see us serving as the best committee to really make that recommendation to the full board.
Well, I concur with that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that would be our contribution to our board goal, would be the development of policy in lieu of the motion I put here. And that's reasonable. I would accept that.
Tanya has a comment?
who would we work with? Right now, we do not have a vehicle for policy development, but certainly anything that would be recommended out of our committee for finance-related policies, we would need counsel on, certainly.
I would
And,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, Dick, go ahead.
Oh, I would recommend that we make a recommendation to the full board that the policy committee, the ad hoc committee, be called into session, if you will, to look at finance-related policies to be included to the policies of the school board.
Well, the ad hoc committee was resolved. Technically, it would be the creation of a new policy committee of some sort. But if we were to develop the policies right out of the finance committee, we would need counsel. What you proposed, it makes sense, but it hinges on the decision of our board officers. Well, primarily the chair has the power to do that. So, Rachel, which would you prefer? I thought it was a good suggestion. I'm ready to withdraw my motion at this point because I like what I heard from you. Is you're leaning more toward policy creation coming directly out of the finance committee, or is it out of a newly formed policy committee of some sort?
No, because I think Tanya, and she had something she wanted to say too, I think Tanya's input is paramount to the development of those policies. She's the most intimately knowledgeable with regard to the district's finances. But then I would like Wendy to possibly serve in on some of those meetings. I think that that's a project, obviously, but I think Wendy could sit in on those meetings that we allocate and say, okay, we are going to talk about finance policies. And just make sure that it works within her schedule. So I don't see the need for the other policy committee, and I'm gonna lean to Tanya.
So, I want to just kind of make reference to the administrative rules. So the administrative rule, there are a series of administrative rules that get down into the details of financial policy and the procedures that we use sort of to meet that goal, this board policy. So if we enter into that exercise, we probably need a review to review what we already have in place, and so we're not replicating that in the administrative rules. I have some that are ready to be updated. Many of them still have my old title. So I just spoke with Ms. Cartledge today about getting those updated. So perhaps the two
Because
need to be
shouldn't they
married
They
together.
should line up, I mean, that's how we have it on the website right now, right, where it matches up with the ARs.
They currently, the ones I'm referring to that need updating, do not reference a board policy right now.
Mhm.
And so, but I think
So
there's
that's-
basically one policy relating to finance.
Yeah.
So they probably will all roll up to 2.1, I think it is. But there are several that I'm prepared to come forward and update. It's mostly a title or minor wording. So I just want to have some consideration there because there are a number of policies. For example, the OS 7 refers directly to the district seeking as many sources of revenue as possible for public and private sources to supplement the funds provided through local taxation and the basic aid offered by the state. So it specifically tells us you must seek all the revenue sources possible. It mentions grants, so hiring a grant writer potentially could be a budget item that would meet that goal of maximizing revenue. So I think, maybe going through those ARs might help to bring out some of the goals of the board that you want to then link back to the budget. And
Yeah,
maximizing revenues would be a good link to, grant writer.
yeah, I think that's something that's usually been missing, is that connection, because I think, or at least in my opinion, it's difficult to claim that we're, exhibiting all these different goals, or that we're trying to reach all these goals if we don't necessarily have a board policy that marries up with the ARs. So I definitely think we need to look at the ARs and marry them up and, make any suggestions with regard to additional audits or frequency of audits, things like that. Because then those things can be brought into a budget discussion, I think, at that point. I think leading by policy is the most important.
I would agree. I withdraw my motion. And thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your suggestions. Sometimes the board policies would marry up, but sometimes they might contradict or say otherwise, in which case, should the board adopt a policy like that, it would override or an existing administrative regulation. That could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could. Certainly, it is helpful. How is our liaison, our district liaison to our committee? So obviously, she would be with us for any policy discussions that we have. But I think we first have to ask Dr. Rodriguez if he's willing to extend Wendy to our committee so that the legality of certain things that come up, or even the other committees as they create their policies, is Frank willing to extend her as a resource to all of us? He may have other plans than Wendy. This might be a drain on her time to some extent, but I think she should be, a part of it. Certainly, just to check the legality. That's all. So I like this idea. I agree with you. Policy should lead. But I was reluctant, I'm reluctant at this time. I don't know what the process will be. If we will see come January, for example, a newly constituted policy committee, I don't know. We could begin that work as soon as our next meeting, generating finance policies and a review of all of our finance regs in the district that exists now.
Yeah, I was gonna, under future agenda topics, I was basically gonna make a suggestion that, number one, we contact Frank and see if we can get Wendy at our next meeting, that we add that as an agenda topic to begin that conversation. And I guess the starting point for that, I see as being us beginning a review of the finance ARs, and then, just vetting them, making suggestions, maybe allocate a certain amount of time per meeting, whatnot, to start going through those, because it would definitely be a project.
No, it's a project. I would agree with you there. Okay, I'm jumping ahead. Forgive me, that's at the end of our agenda.
No, you're fine. I was gonna actually make a motion. I'm not sure how to go about implementing this, but we discussed it, and I'm just gonna revisit it. It's about that efficiency study and trying to incorporate it formally into our budget timeline. Because I think that that's so key and we haven't necessarily given a directive on that. So for that, I'd like to make a motion that the finance committee, recommends to the full board that, the efficiency study results or findings be incorporated into the board's budget discussion. I'm not sure if the April 21st or April 24th meeting would be best. One's the first board budget discussion and the other one's the second, so, they're like 3 days apart. Don't know if that matters.
What was the date that you?
April 21st or 22nd board budget discussion. I just think that we should have that information by that point. And if we make this directive to the full board to make a recommendation to administration, and make sure that it's incorporated into the RFP, and therefore there's a timestamp on it.
So the motion is to get it on that agenda? Is that correct, Rachel?
To get the efficiency study results incorporated at the board budget discussion of April 21st or 24th. I mean, I guess you just have to see where it would fit at that point. One's a work session, so
What if it's
You
done
want to make
before
that
then?
recommendation?
It's done
We
before
want to
then.
keep the board on this, only because they're in control of the agenda, that's all.
right.
That's my only thinking there.
I just was trying to get it on one of those discussions prior to the end of April because the budget forums begin the last week of April.
I would like to second the motion because I'd like to see a discussion with the full board as to the relationship of the efficiency effort to the budget process and how that'll fit and where it will fit. So I will second the motion for that to have that discussion be held. So are there any discussions, more discussions? Yes.
We're gonna bring this, I'm just clarifying the process, we're gonna bring this recommendation to the full board. The full board will either echo this, which will present it to the officers to make certain that this is placed on that specific agenda at that time.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, and we can add, or before, if we can get that information before April 21st, then fantastic. But I was just trying to give at least until then because of the timeline that Tanya, laid out.
Can we say or before if available?
Yes.
Excellent, okay.
Any other?
I'm clear now.
Any other discussion? Motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Motion passes. The continued procurement code discussions is the next item on the agenda.
Or no, I think proposed revisions to the finance committee scope.
Oh, I thought that's what we,
Is that?
No, that was your priorities, you were discussing board priorities. and so
Yeah, we're
now
talking
you-
more.
okay, so
budget
proposed
priorities.
revisions to the finance committee scope, audit and RFP committee.
yes, I requested that be on there, and we have a number of board-issued RFPs out right now, or some have expired, and we don't have a uniform process for vetting those proposals that come back as a result of those board-issued RFPs. We placed on our scope a process for these board-issued auditors switch out every 5 years. But we don't have a uniform process that will address all the other board-issued RFPs that the board has recently signed off on. So I think it's probably safe to remove that until we have a uniform process and we're all addressing, the board is uniformly addressing the RFP. That's it. So I moved to, and we can have discussion, I moved to remove the piece of our scope. I'm sorry, I'm operating off the telephone right now, folks. Dan references the finance committee will serve as the RFP committee in setting
Yeah.
the 5-year audit
I'll second.
page.
Any more discussion?
I just wanted to figure out where that came from initially, because I can't recall where it came from. Was it just because it had been prior practice, or?
Prior practice, the board finance committee did serve, or at least some members of the committee did serve on the external financial audit, the annual financial audit RFP committee. So they served some years without staff as being part of the committee, and other years with staff. So it's worked very well in the past. But I think there was some concern about it this past time, but we will be going out, that audit will be going, that RFP will be going out very soon as well. So we'll just need some direction. We will be going out probably within the next month for that RFP, so we will need some direction whether to include the board or exclude the board from the RFP committee before we release that bid. I would say December 1st is our audit deadline for the State Department, so no auditor is going to be responding before December 1st. So, but we can have it out, right around that time. So that would be really the earliest that we would, release that RFP. So we'll need to be able to establish within the next few weeks. So by the end of the calendar year, we'll need to establish a committee. And so we'll need some direction as whether to include the board or not to include the board.
And-
May I comment?
Please.
Okay. This is another instance where Rachel's words ring true. Policy should lead on this. We don't have a board policy that spells out what that process should look like on board-issued RFPs. We have a reg that, touches on it briefly, but I think this is a prime example of where a policy should be created that might provide direction for us in the future. And yes, we have used past practice, and that's how it went this last time around. Anyway, my motion stands. I think that should be removed as part of our scope until policy development on this matter takes place.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Joanne.
Thank you. Right. Well, I give you credit. You brought the policy lead mantra forward, and I think it's certainly true here.
Will you make a motion to that effect, Joanne?
I
Yeah, she
did.
did.
I made
She
a
did.
motion to
And
it was a wordy one.
Okay.
Remove the, I don't have our scope in front of me.
Yeah, understand.
Remove the piece that refers to the RFP.
RFP every 5 years to vet and provide a recommendation to the full board on the school district's external auditor. Okay,
That's the one.
it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
I,
Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Now, continued procurement code discussions.
I don't have anything on that.
I don't have anything. Joanne, do you have anything on
Rachel, I
that?
thought you did from the previous meeting, and that's why I placed that on there. I do have one question for Tanya, and that is the matrix, the procurement matrix has changes through the years. I was looking through some documents, handouts that you provided our committee. It was in either the last meeting or the one prior, and I noticed that the board is now referenced in more instances in that matrix. I know that it's not included as an attachment today, but can you speak to any recent changes that might have been made to the procurement matrix? Adding the board in a few extra spots where it hadn't been before.
I'm not aware of any changes other than, I believe we added the requirement of board approval over 0.1% of the comprehensive budget. Other than that, there have been no material changes to the matrix. And matrix, again, is just a reference tool we use for staff to kind of take the wordiness of the procurement code and make it simpler for staff and bookkeepers to make sure that we're complying as we are spending, making purchases. So it's not a part of the procurement code, it's just a kind of a reference tool for ourselves. But no change to my knowledge, and I
Okay.
looked over to Reggie, and he indicated that there had been none other than the 0.1% of the comprehensive budget.
Well, let me send that to you so you can see what it is I'm talking about. I realize, again, it's not an attachment today, but that was just one residual question I had from prior discussion. So I have nothing more on procurement, Rachel. My apology. I thought you had some other things you wanted to address in there.
No, I think I'm good there.
Can we move to future agenda topics then?
What was that?
Can we now move to future agenda topics, the last topic on the
Absolutely.
agenda?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I'm going to recommend the beginning of finance board policies. And I guess that would hinge on whether or not we had Wendy here. And then we'd probably, Robin's size of room right now, but would need copies of those appropriate ARs included.
any objection, Joanne?
No objection at all. And I've got one more topic.
Okay,
And I'm wondering, I mean, Rachel's topic is a big project, and I don't know that we can put anything else on that agenda, frankly, but we brought to the full board a while back the recommendation to create a procurement advisory committee. And the board approved that, so we need to begin work on that. And that's got to come up. I've been looking at, putting my feelers out into the community, and I think I've got some folks that might be interested in serving on such a committee, similar to, the referendum committee that was formed, and then there'll be a post-referendum committee. This is similar in that it's made up of citizens, but it's focused on procurement. And I think we've got to address that since the board gave us the go-ahead to put together a plan. So I'm going to tentatively say we might put that on that agenda, but again, it might be a bit much.
Yeah, we can always do like 30 minutes on, you can allocate some time or whatnot, however to keep things in
I
mind.
consider that the policy piece is probably 1, 2, maybe even 3 dedicated meetings.
Yeah.
It is a project, I agree with you, it's a project. But first we've got to get confirmation whether Wendy will, Frank will allow her to be assigned to our group.
Mhm.
But let's put it on there tentatively,
okay. Tanya has a request.
yes.
On our next scheduled first quarter report is to be reported the second board meeting of November. And since this will be ready for, a week or two prior to that to report out. And so since it's a PE, and I think that was under the scope of this committee, and the timing worked out well, I would propose to report the first quarter report for the FY 2020 at that meeting.
I see that. I've got my strategic governance annual work plan in front of me, 3.7 quarterly financial statements. That's got to go on. Okay, we've got 3. I think we need to stop there unless anybody has any
4.7.
time-sensitive or pressing that we need to include on that November 14th meeting.
Good. So am I assuming that we're not going to meet next week?
Next week?
You were talking
I
about,
think we. Do you think so?
No, I mean, Rachel's availability was
okay,
questionable, correct, Rachel?
Yes, I
Okay.
could call in if I have to, but
Okay,
Yeah, let me just tell you, it's very difficult to hear.
I know.
Remotely, we just don't have, that's the best equipment there for these phone-ins, but, so, I mean, you and I could potentially meet, but I feel like we should probably get the full committee on these, important topics. What do you think?
yes, ma'am, I do, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn? Been moved, do we have a second? Second? All in favor? Aye? Are you in favor, Joanne?
I sure am.
Okay.
And have a good evening.
Same to you, safe trip.